Television history has a short memory. Whole sitcoms slipped through prime time like a bad transmission. And no one even slowed down to look. You think you know the 70s because you've seen the hits on endless reruns. But what about the nearly hits, the oddballs, the experiments that vanished before they could find their feet? Which shows deserved a second shot, and which were doomed the moment the pilot wrapped? Keep watching, and you'll meet a shy bassist, an android cop's cousin in spirit, and a Moscow apartment that could barely hold a laugh. Paul Sand in Friends and Lovers. Imagine being a gentle, lovelorn double bass player who lands a chair with the Boston Symphony Orchestra, then going home to a chaotic family that loves you loudly and doubts you constantly. That was Robert Dreyfuss, played by the wonderfully rueful Paul Sand, a rising stage star whom MTM built a full series around in fall 1974. The slot looked unbeatable. It sat right between All in the Family and the Mary Tyler Moore Show on Saturday nights, which sounds like a golden runway. In practice, it was a wind tunnel, the audience that came for a culture war, sledgehammer, and stayed for urbane newsroom. Sparkle did not want a nervous romantic murmuring his way through dates and rehearsal calls. The writing pedigree was serious. James L. Brooks and Alan Burns steered the ship. James Burrows directed episodes. 15 shows aired across the fall into early January 1975, and the ratings were not terrible, just not strong enough to prop up Mary. The premise had charm, the ensemble had spark, and the music hall specificity set it apart. What it lacked was a big comic engine you could summarize in one breath. In the end, the schedule punished nuance. CBS pulled the plug in early 1975 and dropped the Jeffersons into the slot, which blasted off immediately. Forgotten Verdict, low-key, beautifully acted, squeezed by expectations no one could meet. Ivan the Terrible, an American sitcom in 1976 that tried to mine humor from life behind the Iron Curtain, is already working uphill. Ivan the Terrible set itself in a tiny Moscow apartment, crammed with a hotel waiter, his family, a Cuban exchange student boarder, and a feral off-screen wolfhound named Rasputin, who supposedly owned the only bedroom. This was summer replacement television at its most curious. Lou Jacoby anchored the chaos with deadpan resilience, while cameos and character bits skewered every Cold War stereotype they could squeeze into a half hour. 5 episodes aired across late August to mid-September. The series had a satirical spark, but it arrived in the dog days with minimal promotion and asked viewers to laugh at a place many only read about in headlines. That distance made the jokes feel like postcards from a country few understood beyond caricature. Still, there is something appealing about the audacity. Imagine trying this premise during détente and expecting America to warm up to Soviet family life. The show flashed a hint of what single-set farce could do with global politics, then vanished. Forgotten Verdict, brave idea, rough timing, and a summer slot that guaranteed it would be a question on TV trivia night. The Montefuscos. NBC launched The Montefuscos in September 1975 with a full platter of family energy. 3 generations gathered weekly in New Canaan, Connecticut, talking loudly, hugging hard, and announcing punchlines as if the neighbors were hard of hearing. The network put it up against the Waltons and Barney Miller. That was a scheduling dare, and the ratings answered quickly. Within 3 weeks, NBC announced the show would be dropped from the schedule after October. Critics took out the carving knives, blasting the series for leaning on stereotyping instead of character. And yet, the network burned off 8 produced episodes through late October, even as the cancellation notice hung over it. Look closely, and you can see a template that works elsewhere. Food as ritual, a family calendar built around meal times. Crosstalk that becomes musical if the writers find the right rhythm. It just never found the rhythm. The press nicknamed it Montefuscos. That stung, but the deeper issue was timing. Up against 2 polished players, the series needed sharper scripts and a more grounded voice to survive. Forgotten Verdict, an idea with a sturdy core, scheduled to lose and written too broadly to fight its corner. Apple Pie. When Maude wrapped in spring 1978, Norman Lear rolled the dice on Rue McClanahan as a lead. Apple Pie dropped viewers into Kansas City in 1933 with Ginger Nell Hollyhock, a lonely hairdresser who essentially builds her own family through a flurry of personal ads. In walks a con man husband named Fast Eddie. In tap dances, a daughter with showbiz sparkle. A son dreams of flying. A grandfather bumps into furniture and still gets the best lines. The tone is whimsical and slightly surreal, like a vaudeville scrapbook animated and handed a laugh track. 2 episodes aired, then 6 completed episodes never saw broadcast. Why the quick exit? Saturday at 8:30 is a tough demand for any series that is not an event. Add a period setting, a stylized voice, and the expectation that Rue would transmogrify into a different kind of star overnight. And you have a fragile launch. The directing was in steady hands with Peter Boner's. The premise was genuinely unusual, but viewers did not know how to categorize it, and without time to grow, it drifted away. Forgotten Verdict, a sweet, odd confection that needed the patience of a mid-season run, and got the attention span of a weekend errand. Mr. T and Tina. Before Pat Morita became a household name in films, he headlined this short-lived ABC sitcom in fall 1976. Spun out of a character introduction on Welcome Back, Kotter. He played Taro Takahashi, a brilliant Japanese inventor who relocates his family to Chicago and hires Tina Kelly as live-in help for his children. The tone swung between fish-out-of-water misunderstandings and gadget gags. It was one of the first American sitcoms with a largely Asian-American cast, which mattered, but the scripts chased easy misunderstandings instead of building a warm core that could last beyond the pilot rush. 9 episodes were produced, 5 aired across late September through October, and the series was replaced in the slot almost immediately. The press was unkind, the time period pitted it against other established shows, and the audience never took the ride. You can still feel the importance of the attempt, though. Network television rarely handed the keys to an Asian American lead in the 70s. That alone makes it worth remembering, even as you wince at jokes that feel like a tug-of-war between bold casting and timid writing. Forgotten Verdict, a meaningful first step, tangled in a show that did not yet know how to carry its weight. Holmes and Yo-Yo. You want high concept? Try a straight-arrow detective paired with a brand-new android partner who prints photos from his mouth and magnetizes silverware at crime scenes. That was ABC's Holmes and Yo-Yo in 1976, with Richard B. Schull's weary cop trying to babysit John Schuck's cheerful robot while solving actual cases. The show walked a tightrope between comic mishaps and procedural beats. Every week, Yo-Yo's body would misfire like a jammed copier. His chest camera would whir. His circuits would glitch at the worst possible moment. That physical comedy built a rhythm you could recognize from a mile away. And when it landed big. The problem was tone. Viewers didn't quite know whether to treat it like a police spoof or a warm buddy comedy about a decent man teaching a machine to be human. The writing nudged both ways, then split the difference. Even so, the production values were crisp, the leads were cast exactly right, and the concept had a lovable, gentle heart that separated it from louder network fare. 13 episodes aired across the 1976 to 1977 season, with the final 2 held until late summer after an early stop order. In a different slot, with tighter farce mechanics and a firmer identity, this could have been a quirky cult staple. Forgotten Verdict, sincere, silly, and sabotaged by its own half-step between spoof and sweetness. Lots of luck. Blue-collar sitcoms were everywhere in the early 70s, but Lots of Luck found a specific lane. Dom DeLuise played Stanley Belmont, a decent guy stuck in the lost and found at the city bus company, propping up a household that never quite gets its act together. The charm was in the grind. Stanley clocks in, rummages through the debris of 100 commutes, trades wisecracks with his buddy, then trudges home to a chorus of needs and noise. It was adapted from the British smash On the Buses, and you can feel the bones of that older show in the setups and family rhythms. On paper, that sounds like a ready-made winner. In practice, cultural translation is hard. The UK original leaned into bawdy workplace banter and local flavor. The NBC version softened the sharper corners, shifted the emphasis to home life, and relied on Dom's generous timing to keep the engine humming. Some episodes sing, especially when Kathleen Freeman bulldozes a scene as the force of nature mom. and when the show embraces the oddball treasures that pass through the depot. But the ratings were middling, and the network moved on after one season. It did not fail for lack of a star or a premise. It sputtered because the humor needed a touch more bite to stand out on a busy schedule. Forgotten Verdict. A warm, watchable import that never quite found the sharper punchline it needed. The girl with something extra. Sally Field and John Davidson play a blissed-out couple who discover on the wedding night that the bride can read minds. That alone would panic most sitcom husbands. The series uses it to test a romance in slow motion. Every stray thought becomes a problem. A doubt that would have faded now sits on the coffee table and asks for airtime. The best episodes treat the mind reading as a metaphor for young love. What if you really knew what your partner was thinking before they figured it out themselves? What if you had to decide when to speak and when to let a feeling pass? NBC slotted the series for the 1973 to 1974 season and gave it a full order. 22 episodes aired. You can see the network trying to steady the tone across the run. Early on, the ESP drives the plot. Later, the stories downplay it and tilt toward classic domestic mishaps, as if the show were being sanded down into a simpler newlywed comedy. That sanding removed some of the spark because the thing that made the concept special was the risk. Field is luminous either way, flitting between certainty and second thoughts. The show earned curious eyes, but not long-term loyalty, and it closed after a single season. Forgotten Verdict. A bright idea about intimacy that got nervous about its own power and lost the very edge that made it sing. The Corner Bar. A neighborhood pub can be a perfect sitcom engine. Regulars, walk-ins, and a bartender who sees everything. The Corner Bar tried the 2 summers in a row for ABC starting in 1972, swapping owners between seasons and tuning the ensemble to find the right mix. Some jokes were broad, some were whispered. What the show really had, though, was a milestone. Among the regulars was Peter Panama, a witty ascot-loving set designer played by Vincent Schiavelli, often cited as the first out-gay recurring character on American television. It was a small role. It was also a brave one for network TV at the time. The series itself never reached the easy chemistry that later bar comedies would master, and the summer schedule did it no favors. Still, you can feel a blueprint forming. The set was a crossroads. The dialogue lived in the back-and-forth rhythms of regulars who know each other a little too well. When it clicked, it felt like eavesdropping on a table you would happily join. When it missed, it sounded like a joke told one round too late. The legacy now lives less in the punchlines and more in the door it cracked open for representation on broadcast TV. Forgotten Verdict, a modest hangout show that quietly pushed history forward. Karen. Fresh off Room 222, Karen Valentine headlined a DC comedy in early 1975 as a staffer for a scrappy citizen lobby. Week after week, she waded into red tape, faced off with smooth talkers on the Hill, and tried to keep idealism afloat without losing her humor. The premise had snap. The episodes had a smart topical sheen. And if you squint, you can see the seed of later workplace comedies that blend issue of the week stories with character beats. The challenge, again, was tone. The show wanted to be breezy and timely all at once, which can work if the jokes arrive like clockwork and the stakes stay human. Karen never got that consistent rhythm. Some stories spark, especially when Valentine plays exasperation as a slow burn rather than a punchline. Others feel like headlines delivered as skits. ABC ran the series across the first half of 1975 and closed the book after a short, 13-episode run. You cannot say it lacked purpose. It simply needed sharper comic gears to convert good intentions into must-watch half hours. If anything, Karen now plays like an early draft of a format that would later thrive. A smart woman navigates a system built to say no, surrounded by oddballs who make the day survivable. Forgotten Verdict, a worthy try at topical comedy that deserved a second pass in a friendlier slot. We've got each other. Here is the setup you could pitch in one breath. He works from home as a commercial artist and handles the cooking and laundry. She commutes to Los Angeles to assist a demanding photographer who keeps life glamorous and chaotic in equal measure. That reversal was the point. The series wanted to show a marriage that swapped the usual 70s jobs and asked viewers to root for an arrangement that a lot of homes were quietly trying anyway. It came from MTM, which meant gentle wit, character grace notes, and a preference for small, telling moments over neon punchlines. So what went wrong? Timing and identity. CBS slid it into the famous Saturday corridor after the Bob Newhart show, effectively asking a modest new comedy to hold a block that used to include Mary Tyler Moore. That is not a test. That is a mountain climb in dress shoes. The writing team of Tom Patchett and Jay Tarses knew how to build human-scale laughs, and the cast could absolutely deliver. What the show never solved was the weekly comic engine that would force sparks in every episode without betraying its lived-in warmth. It lasted 13 episodes across 1977 and 1978, then closed shop. The idea aged well. The series did not get enough time to prove it. Forgotten verdict, smart premise, right company, wrong slot, and a gentle voice that needed a longer runway. Detective School, one flight up. The promise was catnip. A burnt-out private investigator teaches a bargain detective class in a shabby building. His students range from earnest to half-prepared to gloriously clueless. Every lesson spills into a real case, and by the final tag, the class has survived another round they probably were not ready for. James Gregory anchored it with weary authority as Nick Hannigan, a man who has seen it all and would like to see less. The students pulled him into messes anyway. That was the weekly kick. The classroom was a clown car, the streets were a surprise quiz, and the exam was whether anyone made it back without losing their lunch or their rented surveillance gear. The mechanics were there. A case of the week, a recurring group dynamic that could shift alliances and fuel running jokes. A veteran lead who could throw a deadpan that could stop a bus. 13 episodes aired in 1979, sometimes described in 2 short blocks, with a summer taste and a fall return. And then the school shuttered. The series needed a little more snap in the plotting and a slightly firmer tone. At its best, it felt like community college Columbo, with a laugh track and a fondness for oddballs. At its wobbliest, it felt like sketch comedy with a badge. Forgotten verdict. The cast chemistry was promising, the premise was money, and the bell rang before the writers could refine the playbook. Flatbush. CBS launched this Brooklyn buddy comedy in 1979 and discovered a limit the hard way. The show followed 5 neighborhood pals with swagger, hustle, and a habit of walking into trouble. On a different network in a different year, that crew might have read as warm knuckleheads. Here, the tone leaned broad, the jokes leaned easy, and the response from actual Brooklyn officials was immediate. The borough president complained that the series leaned on ugly stereotypes. That objection landed in headlines and cast a shadow over a show that was already light on genuine laughs. The run felt like a van stalling in an intersection. 6 episodes were produced, 3 aired, the rest stayed on a shelf. The idea of a local hangout comedy was not the issue. That model works when the characters are sharply drawn and the banter feels like detail rather than a label. Flatbush loved the label too much. In the postmortem, you can find defenders who argue the problem was ratings, not outrage. Fair point. Jokes that roar tend to survive even when the press is grumpy. These did not roar. Forgotten verdict. A loud concept that confused attitude with character and got yanked after a chorus of boos and a shortage of belly laughs. The Waverly Wonders. Joe Namath had the charisma. NBC had a plan. Hand him a sitcom about a former pro basketball player who washes up at a Wisconsin high school to teach history and coach a basketball team that has forgotten how to win. You can see the charm immediately. The coach is great with swagger and not so great with dates on a timeline. The kids are scrappy and funny, and there is a stern foil down the hall to balance the pep talks. The problem was speed. The show premiered in early September 1978 and was gone by the first week of October. 4 episodes aired from a batch of 9 that were produced. The slot was a minefield. It faced variety on one side and a superhero action hour on the other. Ratings were soft, reviews were cooler than expected, and NBC swapped it out for a new Arnold Jackson comedy that raced into the top third of the season. That swap told you everything. The network wanted a fast hit. Waverly was a gentle trier that needed more reps and a lead still finding his comic reads. Namath loosened up as the run went on, and you can see a version of the show that could have played like a warm Friday night hangout if given time. Forgotten Verdict. A better idea than execution, with a lovable pitch that threw an interception in the first quarter. Blansky's Beauties. Happy Days was a factory for hits. Gary Marshall's team rolled out a small universe of related shows, some legendary and some barely out of the wrapper. Blansky's Beauties was the one that never found its beat. Nancy Walker starred as a showbiz den, mother in Las Vegas, wrangling a lineup of dancers and hopefuls while a cluster of future names breezed through. The series carried direct links to the Milwaukee Empire. Actors and character connections crossed over. Theme energy felt familiar, and the vibe tried to bottle the same fizz in a new setting. That is a tall order. The Wisconsin nostalgia of Happy Days and the blue-collar zing of Laverne and Shirley came with built-in tone. Vegas backstage comedy needs precision, rhythm, real backstage texture. The show tried to pace charm where specificity should go, and the seams showed. ABC ran 13 episodes from February through June of 1977, then called time. In the years since, the curiosity value has only grown. You can spot familiar faces, catch the shared universe links, and still feel the emptiness where a comic center should be. Forgotten Verdict. A high pedigree project that thought proximity to a hit would do the heavy lifting, then learned every show needs its own reason to exist. See the pattern. The 70s were packed with experiments, some brave, some messy, many left behind after a handful of airings. You met a homemaker husband who deserved a second season, a robot spiritual cousin chasing clues with night students, a Brooklyn crew that lost the room, a quarterback turned coach, and a Vegas chorus with no song. Which one gets your vote for a modern revival, and who would you cast to fix it? Drop your picks, hit subscribe, and share this with the friend who thinks they have seen it all.